we are running a discussion series on literary theory texts, and already we have given lectures on a few topics covering the last part of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century. And you know how ideas are born and then they travel across time. And today's discussion is about a text that belongs to George Eliot, the famous woman novelist in the 19th century. And generally, novelists do not express themselves critically or theoretically, but some do, particularly those who are active in life in the cultural field in their time. And George Eliot was one such person. She was at the receiving end of prejudice from the male community, and she had to change her name from Mary Ann Evans to George Eliot in the 19th century. So that's the kind of compulsion we have. And George Eliot is also a critic, a thinker. And if you read her novels, you realize that she gives that kind of personality, persona, to the characters that she creates. For today's discussion about an essay by her, will be done by Professor Richa Bajaj, who teaches in the Department of English, Hindu College, Delhi University. And before I request her to begin, I would like to make a short statement about a novelist who is also a theory person, who is also a thinker. Does that not come in the way of one's creative writing? Because writers create, they use symbols, they use dialogues, and they are not supposed to have a direct opinion. But in this case, you have a writer who had an opinion. She may not have imposed that opinion on the characters that she portrayed, but then there is some kind of a relationship between a thinking writer and the characters that she or he creates. So what is your view? And please, after that, you could begin with your discussion.
Thank you, Professor Prakash. Yes, I think there is something distinct. There is a distinct quality about a novelist essayist, a novelist who turns into an essayist. In this case, of course, in the case of George Eliot, she's written this essay that I'll be taking up before venturing to write novels. So, in a way, her kind of frustrations with the way literature was being written by women at the time, perhaps you could say, led to her writing this essay and finally taking to writing novels of the kind she wanted to read or she thought were required in the time. So I do feel that a novelist essayist or an essayist novelist is a distinct category, because one is always then in the sphere of images and in the sphere of reality when one is talking or when one is propounding even a theory, even if it is a hypothesis. You notice that these writers often go to the real lived experience or the reality around them as it exists, the types that exist in society, and from there on they build their own sort of a theory. It's not like they have an abstract conceptual world and or a theory in the abstract and then they try to apply it to literature. On the contrary, they begin with life as they see around, life as is lived around them, types that exist around them, and from there, in that moment, they then venture to build a theory out of it. So it is definitely more exploratory. I find that essayists, novelists, essays, whichever we want to use as a kind of an adjective, and whichever is the real one in this case, they mostly work around things that they mostly work around observation. And based on this observation, they build a sort of a theory. So it is more exploratory and open-ended in that sense. They don't seem to have a kind of a set notion or an already reached solution or an already reached conclusion beforehand. In fact, they seem to go along and find their path, in their essays. And often you find that at least in the case of George Eliot, you find that there is a kind of a critical analysis of the works that are available at the time, in the sense that what is being written, what are the kind of characters that are being projected, are these cliched characters, are these characters rather vacuous, do they have some purpose, Do they project some kind of ethos? So, you know, she's able to look at critically these characters which she has read, and then offer her analysis of the situation. So, in a way, in George Eliot's case, she's a very good that way a critic, which is why this lecture is also titled The Feminist Critic. Now, of course, the way we understand feminism is not how feminism in the first place was understood in the 19th century, right? And the term is, of course, now overused in our own time. But in the 19th century, it was just a female concern, or the concern or with women or women writers. And women writers were gaining spotlight in the 19th century. The novelists, if we see the 19th century, often has been known as the novelist, the era of the women novelists, because they have been able to prove their success and they've been able to prove their worth as novelists in the field. But then, who were these novelists as writers, thinkers, people who had to face challenges around them? And what kind of society they inhabited? What were their real problems of living? And what were the legal rights that they had? What was their political stance? All these become more evident to us once we go to the essays of this period, and which is why I think we are also spending time on the formative years of feminism, so to speak, the formative century, if we could put it that way, of feminism, where these ideas are beginning to take shape and take roots. And finally, of course, it becomes in the 20th century another entire discipline of study. But in this age, in the 19th century, it is still more exploratory, as writers are themselves not very sure which is the right path that they should take, and yet they know that there has to be a right path that they have to carve for themselves, and they have to write about women's concerns. So what is the exact a concern, you know, for women? What should women be writing about? What are the problems that they face? So they know that they must be doing this. And this century is also the century that builds up to the suffrage of the early 20th century. Women received the suffrage in 1918, right? They win the right to vote. But these years, particularly the period from 1850 to 1900, this is the period when women, this is the formative period of that suffrage that they are finally able to win. So it is in this period that they are also able to build a sort of a collective narrative and a kind of a collective theory of sorts. It's not like they're building some kind of theory, but they're collectively working to reach a moment of, to reach rights for women, for freedom for women, right to vote for women, and a number of reform bills that took place, along with the revolutions of 1848. You know, these have already, I mean, if you look at this entire century, and you go back, you find there has been the American Revolution, there's been the French Revolution, then England had to bring in a series of reforms in order to restrict a revolution or not have a revolution, because England was already boiling with rage, so to speak, and people wanted change. So reforms were introduced, a series of reforms, and George Eliot talks about them in her novels. And then 1848 we have the revolution in France and other places. So this period, so to speak, is a period where the protest movement, it is at its peak, even in America. And England was constantly looking at America, America was constantly looking at England, and the leading, the rights that the black people getting their rights, their justice at the end of the Civil War. So I think, cumulatively speaking, all these historical events have added to this women's movement in 19th century, which is also a very important point in time to understand that how the suffrage movement of the early 20th century will take shape, or the suffrage of the early 20th century gains its strength from the work of writers and thinkers in this period that we are speaking of. So that's how I would like to begin.
That makes great sense, absolutely.
Right. So, and with this, if I take you straight to then George Eliot's time period, then she's born in 1819 and lives around 1880. So most of her works, from 1850s onwards, there is a lot of work which is being done around women writers. So you find even John Stuart Mill's work on subjection of women, or G.H. Lewis's work on the lady novelist, is coming around the same time. So 1850s is the decade when you find that a lot of essays as also novels are written which are women centric. Either they are about women or by women. Essays are being written at the same time in 1850s, and that's why I brought in this essay today for discussion, where we discuss a feminist essay in the period of this 1850s, where how are women writers being viewed and how are women critics being viewed. I mean, we talk about women novelists, but what about women critics? Is criticism is still less a domain for women, in that sense. In the 19th century, novelists also had to change their names, using a male pseudonym. As in the case of George Eliot herself, she had to turn to use a male pseudonym to be able to be so that she is taken seriously as a novelist. So while there is less space in novels, there is still less space in criticism in the 19th century. Women are not seen as serious critics. In fact, criticism is totally away from it. A lot of 20th century criticism by feminists has looked at this period as a period where what Mary Ellman, for instance, calls phallic criticism. She says it's male centric. So women are judged against the standard that males have set for them. What about women critics, who then were also trying to bring in their own standards of judging women writers? So I think it's an important space that George Eliot claims, and several other women try to claim, which is which was still far away from them. Novels were still given to them as a kind of a place where some kind of sentimentalism could come in from women, and they were accepted to some extent. But criticism is a new area for them, and George Eliot is doing justice to this and in fact, when she published this essay that I'll be taking up, which is titled Silly Novels by Lady Novelists, it is published anonymously. She doesn't even publish it in her own name. So the idea that criticism is a new domain for women, but women are claiming it, and they're trying to enter and barge in that space as well. So this is the important moment. 1850s to 1880 is a very important moment for feminist movement, because this is where actual groundwork is being done. Now, as I said, George Eliot was actually born in 1819 as Marianne Evans, and as I said, she wrote under the pseudonym of George Eliot. And in order to be taken seriously as a writer and not be seen as a sentimental one, she took this false name, pseudonym of a male name, right? But not just as a writer, as a person also, she was quite, she was the subject of this kind of scandal. She was an atheist, first of all, and who was also propagating feminist views as a progressive feminist. And being an atheist, she was deeply inspired by John Stuart Mill's ideas, especially his essay on Subjection of Women that came out in 1869. She advocated women's education and suffrage and was sympathetic to the 1848 revolution. So you can see the kind of mental bent of the writer, who's already on the side of fighting for women's suffrage, for women's education, sympathizing with the 1848 revolutions, and so on and so forth. She developed an intense relationship with George Henry Lewes, who was also, like John Stuart Mill, in favor of women's emancipation and women's education. And he was a married man and with children, and still they both had a very deep sort of a relationship, and they were open about it, which is why it led to a very scandalous sort of a life that she led. That she was always in the eye of the storm, so to speak. So he was an established critic and a spokesperson for women's empowerment. Speaking of the appeal of George Eliot, Henry James, the novelist, actually went on and said, and I quote, "Behold me, literally in love with the great horse-faced blue stocking," end quote. So there is a sense of course, associating blue stocking with her, but also that she became a kind of a irresistible force at the time, and men and women alike were in love with her work and her personality. Lewis, with whom she had a relationship, also wrote in 1952 the essay "The Lady Novelist," and there he had mentioned that the literature of women, and this I'm quoting, "The literature of women has fallen short of its functions owing to a very natural and a very explicable weakness. It has been too much a literature of imitation. To write as men write is the aim and besetting sin of women. To write as women is the real task they have to perform. End quote. This is Lewis, who was, of course, a close confidant of George Eliot, telling us the flaw that he thinks that women faced, and and the flaw is, of course, one of imitation. That they are trying to write as men, that they are still they haven't come out, that they have internalized the patriarchal values to such an extent that they seem to judge their own writing as men judge their own writing. So rather than evolving a new set of standard and a measure for their own writing, they judge their writings by how men perceive good writing. So, and also they're always self-conscious that they must appeal to the audience and they must be seen as good novelists, but who's the judge here? It's always the male gaze that they are catering to. So to some extent it's always imitation and always being subjected to the male gaze that novelists of this period try to appease and placate both male and female audiences. Now, the essay that I'm taking up for discussion today is titled Silly Novels by Lady Novelists, which is by George Eliot. Obviously, it's a very interesting title, and I'd like Professor Prakash to comment on the title. What do you think?
In fact, my initial inquiry was keeping in mind this title, that women at that point of time did not have the kind of courage that they have today, but then they were struggling within themselves, and some of them didn't struggle enough. So I think they have been picked up by the author. They write, but they don't think, and they are basically writing about emotions, about feelings, and as George Henry Lewis also would have complained, that they don't talk like themselves, they talk like men. So that way, I think it's a good way of disciplining and chastising fellow women novelists by this great woman novelist in the 19th century.
Right, yes. So this is one reason, which it's one of the famous essays of George Eliot, and it was published anonymously in a Westminster Review in 1856, and it takes a critical view of literature that was written by women of the unrealistic and the frivolous kind. Basically, she found that novels that were unrealistic and frivolous, and of course she brought it out in 1856, and soon after she'd go on to bring out her own first novel, Adam Bede. So in a way, she's able to put down how novels should not be written in the first place, and how what is then the content of a good novel. But is this essay only about novels? Is this only about literature? No, it's not, and which is why I say it's a feminist essay. Even though she is in the essay dividing novels into different categories written by women and is largely calling them silly, so it might appear that it might appear that she's helping patriarchal values, suggesting that women write silly novels, but it is exactly what she's trying to counter here in this essay. She's trying to say that this is how men want us to remain, silly novelists, and they seem to make us believe that we are good by praising sky-high works that are actually very silly. So it actually takes away from the strength of the movement. If we remain conceited in our worlds, thinking that we are great novelists, and even when we are offering really nothing, it's not just individual fame that is at stake. She suggests that there is an entire generation that is reading such novels and feeding on such novels, and what kind of future then we see for women with this kind of novels that are being made available to them. What kind of future are we giving them? So in a way, she's targeting, at one level, this is an exercise in self-criticism also, which is a good exercise in any case, where it is important for writers to look at themselves also critically, and not just think that they are women so they can write and that they should write, and anybody who criticizes them becomes an enemy of the movement. On the contrary, she puts forth the point that women are deliberately being kept in this state of ignorance and in this state of sentimental foolishness, wherein they are not being allowed to enter the real domain of life where they can question the real questions and therefore offer real education to women of the time. And this kind of novel writing is a kind of a facade or a kind of a sham that doesn't help us go into the deeper layers of the problems that exist in society. So therefore, I also find this essay an important essay as part of the feminist movement itself. So, taking this forward, let's look at this particular point. That in an exercise in self-criticism, then George Eliot, a feminist progressive writer, speaks of her own sex and unabashedly then targets women writers who write out of vanity and without real purpose or thought, according to her. And therefore, there is this essay, the formulaic, she says that they are using a sort of a formula. It's a kind of a formulaic romance which is being projected by women who imitate the style of men, and then therefore it fits well in the societal code of conduct because they're exactly writing how men would write and exactly catering to men's fantasies. So women never really write or express what they want to express because they are always catering to a male gaze and a male fantasy. So women are also presented as men would like to see them. So there is no sense, so they fit in the societal codes of conduct. So if they are writing like that, then it is not. It does not fulfill the purpose of feminist movement or women's movement as such, because you are not really talking what women feel and think. You are really saying what society wants women to feel and think. So in that sense, she is able to strike at and slam these writers for engaging in this frivolous vain activity of novel writing without actually taking the real questions into account.
Are you saying that she is trying to explore the idea of women's identity in literature? Because what women think, how they are in literature, what they should project in literature?
Right. Yes, she is. She is always talking about that. In fact, throughout the essay, she takes multiple examples of the time, and through these examples, she is able to suggest, how and where novelists are going wrong. So, there are topical examples and of novels, of stock characters, of typical characters, suggesting that this character does this and does that. Let me just give you an example of this, where she mentions one of the categories. I'll come to the categories that she talks about, the different species of writings. She talks about this particular kind which she calls the mind and the millinery species, and here she says she's talking about the heroine, and this is how she visualizes the heroine or tells us what the heroine is like of such novels. She says the heroine is usually an heiress, probably a peeress in her own right, with perhaps a vicious baronet, an amiable duke, an irresistible younger son of a marquis as lover in the foreground, as a clergyman and a poet singing for her in the middle distance, and a crowd of undefined adorers dimly indicated beyond. So this is how she's projected. She says, there is this woman, she's an upper class woman and probably well-educated woman, and everybody's falling for her. It's like, and she's always beautiful, and she's the perfect image. She says her eyes, and I go on and I quote, she says her eyes and her wit are both dazzling, her nose and her morals are alike free from any tendency to irregularity. She has a superb contralto and a superb intellect. She is perfectly well dressed and perfectly religious. She dances like a sylph and reads the Bible in the original tongues. She is the ideal woman in feelings, faculties, and flounces. End quote. So you see, she's extremely satirical here and takes a dig at these women, who's like a perfect image of everything, and is one who is for men are falling for, and she's the candy for everyone in that sense. So. Again, she says that this kind of a projection would cater to male fantasy. But what about women? Do women want to read such novels? Do we want to have this woman in perfection in every sphere? Are we projecting a picture of a woman who really doesn't exist, and thereby either adding to the complexes of women, telling women to desire to be this woman that they are not, and also to feel complexed that they are not that woman? So in order when an ideal is created of this sort, which is also very she says it is so unrealistic, so away from truth, that women are always wishing to be that woman, that a woman who doesn't exist, but this woman is exactly what any man would want a woman to be. So, in that sense, she is targeting the very essence of this kind of writing, the mind, and she calls them the mind and the milliners species. So, I'll go on to talk about it's very interesting, this essay, because she divides the novels in different species, and she says there are different species of writings. She calls it the genus, right? So there is a category, an entire class of writing that belongs to this phase and that phase, and she builds at least 4 categories in this essays, 4 kinds of species, she says, that exist today. And when dealing with each, she is also dealing with a particular social group in society, and hitting out at that group and for all the faults that exist there, and at the same time the class difference that exists between different groups, and how one kind of literature is meant for one class and another kind of literature is meant for another class of people.
So in this essay, friends, Dr. Richa Bajaj has talked about the problem that the woman novelist faces in the 19th century, and first she has to look inwards. She has to see whether she is representing the case of the male fantasy about women, or whether the woman is talking in her own terms, in her own language. So in this part of the discussion, the question about male identity, about female identity is gone into, is explored by George Eliot, and in the following discussion you will have more points that she has made in the essay. Thank you.